Okay.
Just let her get started.
Manners.
Yes, dear.
What fun. Okay. Hi there, I'm Jan Spragge, and you're listening to The Jan Spragge Show here on Northumberland 89.7, live streaming worldwide at our website, northumberland897.ca. Happy to say that our studio is packed today with a group of award-winning Canadian authors who have a unique and groundbreaking connection that has their books flying off the shelves. In 2012, Orca Book Publishers took on something that had never been done before in Canadian publishing. 7 of the best authors in Canada writing 7 stories that all spring forth from the same initial storyline. Novels that are interwoven at times, yet independent. The first series was enormously successful. Readers wanted more. All 7 authors from the original series returned this fall with a second set of 7 novels, the 7 sequels. It's my pleasure to have 4 of the award-winning authors of the 7 series with us today. Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock. Welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time to chat with us today.
No, it's great to be here.
Thanks for
Nice to be
having us.
here.
Me too.
Everybody speak at once. Do we get to talk now?
Natural.
I think we should all talk now.
7 books, 7 different authors, all with their unique style, and all working off the same storyline. What was your initial reaction when Eric approached you with this idea?
Why me? Why me? I was sitting at my computer and I got a phone call from Eric. I could see it was Eric, so I had to, you take that few seconds to decide. And I picked up.
That explains why when I call.
Screening the calls, nice.
And he explained this. He explained to me that he wanted to do these 7 books, and the real draw for me was actually not that it was you could do anything you want. So Norah, if you want to write a mystery, I write mostly mysteries and crime novels, you can do that. And I think that was a big draw for all of us, that we could kind of take the initial little idea and run with it in any kind of genre that we wanted to.
Yeah, I think Eric really wanted that. I think he wanted to choose 6 other authors who are all very different from himself as well, and really explore what they could bring to a story that began with the same scene, essentially.
Yeah, well, what's neat about Eric's idea and his approach was, and it's very tricky to do, is he came up with an idea to start you off that all the stories could branch out from, instead of an idea that all the stories would sort of converge on at the end.
Yeah, the idea being that all 7 endings could be unique, individual, and they didn't give anybody else's ending away. Everything starts the same way but ends wherever you want to take it. It was a really good idea.
And some of us didn't even talk to the other ones of us when we were writing it. I mean, some of us did. Maybe a lot of us did. I don't know, but I didn't.
You're just a hermit. Yes.
What was your name again?
Who am I? But that was interesting because, I just took my story, and then I think other people did, but some of the characters, we have 2 sets of brothers. So, for example, Richard's character and Ted's character are brothers. So there is some linkage in those books, whereas mine is not related to anybody.
Yeah. Well, I think Eric, because he's obviously a writer himself, he understands the way to make these things work is to free up people to do what they do well. Like Richard's saying, you don't want to have a situation where you're telling all of the writers that their story has to end in a certain way. So in some ways, I always thought it was almost like a writing exercise, but it was professional authors. Let's have an idea, and we have the scene, and everybody has the same scene, and then everybody take it in whatever direction you feel comfortable taking it.
Canadian Children's Book News says that reading the series is like looking at the world through a kaleidoscope with shifts in perspective from book to book. This seems to be a really nice part of this series. Can you comment on that a bit?
I think that's a really nice way to put it. I remember once the series was done, before it had been published, and I had the opportunity, like all of us did, I guess, to read the whole series. And I thought it was a cool idea. Obviously, I thought I'd done a reasonably good job with my book, and I figured, everybody else were excellent writers. But when I actually sat down and read the whole thing together, it was really an interesting experience, and it was a different experience than I thought it would be. Not to sound too highfalutin, but it's almost like you're looking at a sculpture, like a Picasso sculpture or something like that.
A little bit highfalutin.
And you walk around the sculpture. The way that Cubism works, you see things from different angles, and that's what it was like. It was this story of this family, this grandfather and these grandsons, and you saw it from all these different angles. And it really enriched the story when I read all 7 together.
What I liked was you didn't get a chance to get bored. If you're reading a series written by the same guy or girl, the same author, you're going to say by the third or fourth book, okay, been here before, you've had this thought, you've had this kind of character, you've had this kind of problem before. But with 7 different minds, I would say minds, seven different minds working, you're never going to get the same problem twice. Everybody's going to solve it different ways, and so the idea of surprise, which to my mind is a huge element in the enjoyment of reading, the surprise element is there every single story.
Sure, and that means variations in tone and in level of seriousness and so on and so forth. So you bounce from mystery to historical to comic to straight-ahead adventure story, and if you like that, you never can tell what you're going to get when you open that book.
And yet, at the same time, we couldn't contradict each other with our characters. We couldn't have situations where one character did something and it was completely contradicted in another book.
Right.
So we did have that element where we had to work together and make sure that those contradictions didn't exist in our stories.
Yeah.
And the editor on this project,
had a lot of gray hair.
Really, yes, exactly. I think she was saying never again at the end of the first series.
She's
and yet
dead
here
now.
she is
No,
again.
Interesting segue, never again, because in fact, here we are with a sequel, and poor Sarah.
But one thing that's really important about it, people call it a series, and when I think series, I think sequential. You read book 1 and then you read book 2 and so on. And this isn't like that. This is more of a simultaneous. I can't remember the word, but all the action takes place. It's a happening. No, that's bad since that movie.
It's a simultaneum.
A simultaneum. Everything takes place. Each book takes place at the same time as every other book. He stole that.
From what?
It's a writer who makes up words.
Oh.
So that's what's really nice. So you don't have to wait until you read book 1 to read book 2. There is no book 1. You just pick a book and you can read it, and you can never read another one and hopefully still be satisfied, or you could read them all. And that's what's really cool about it.
One of the ways in which you know that's cool is that when you go into the schools, a lot of times the kids will put their hand up during the Q&A that all of us have at the end of our presentations. And the student will say, so which is the first book? And which one should I read first? They just always assume. Even if you tell them that during the presentation, it's just such a unique idea. And when you can get them to understand that everything happens at the same time, they find that really interesting. And then they can approach it in whatever way they want. They can read 1 book, 2 books. They can start with Norah, start with Richards, whatever.
I think that's a really nice point for reluctant readers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe boys. Is this more directed towards young boys?
Originally, Eric wanted boys to read it, so the 7 heroes are all male. We've all been around the block often enough to know that you have to have strong female characters. So all the 7 books have strong female characters in them, but the heroes are all male. Eric's idea, I think, was to get the reluctant readers, who tend typically to be boys, interested in the stories we would be telling. So that's certainly part of the mandate.
But girls read them.
Girls read them.
Girls will read books with male protagonists and female protagonists, and boys, I think, are a little bit more reluctant. I was actually talking to a 14-year-old boy, and the idea of reading a book with a female protagonist didn't appeal to him. But, that's not everybody.
Unfortunately, that's true. I mean, if there's a girl on the cover and it's pink and there's a horse or something like that, the
Hey,
boys...
tell me more.
The boys, for some reason, either right or wrong, they don't want to read it. But it is true that the girls are amazing. They like to read any kind of book.
Absolutely.
And the girls like to know what the boys are thinking. What's that guy thinking? Why would he do that? And I think that's one of the things that they're
boys
interested
thought
in.
at all. I just like to point out.
Do you?
What? I just like to point out that you can read them in any order. Right? And Shane got in trouble with that in the first series because his book was called Last Message, and and it was the last in the package. Mm-hmm. People thought that must be the last book in the series. It's not. But if you have trouble sorting out which one you want, I suggest the best thing to do is just read mine 7 times.
It's easy for the
Some reviewers actually said that one of the things they liked about my book was at the very end of the book I actually summed the whole series up, and it worked perfectly because it was the last book in the series.
Today we have the pleasure of chatting with authors from the 7 series sequel. After the break, we'll chat more with Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock about the series. I'm Jan Spragge. You're listening to Northumberland 89.7. Please stay tuned.
Okay, so this is a bit from Chapter 8 of Coda. In this book, my character Spencer is searching for his younger brother Bunny, who has gone missing from the skating rink at Nathan Phillips Square down in Toronto City Hall, and he has traced. He's gone on their home computer and he's used the locator app to find Bunny's cell phone, and it's taken him to a kind of scuzzy place down in Parkdale, and he's hoping he will find Bunny there. The part goes like this. The Baby Breeze Motel, weekly, monthly, AC, SAT, TV, vacancy, sits crumbling in its parking lot like half a sandwich left at the back of a fridge. I think scuzzy is the technical word for this style. The app says Bun's phone is around here, somewhere. I was kind of hoping I'd see Bun skating on a frozen puddle or something, but that's not on, and he's still not answering either. All I can do is hit the locator tab on the app, walk past the rooms, and hope I hear his phone beep. I turn off the van reluctantly and climb out. It took another 3 tries to start it for this drive. I hope it starts when I need to get out of here. It's colder by the lake, and up close the Baby Breeze isn't exactly homey. Curtains are drawn across every window. The plastic chairs out front are magnets for cigarette butts and empties. 2 sorry cars are parked about 5 doors apart. Both look older than me. One has a flat tire. The O'Toole mobile fits right in. I hit the button on my phone and I start walking, trying to seem like just another wholesome teenager looking for harmless fun at a Fleabag motel. A faint beeping kicks in as I pass the second car. It gets stronger every step I take. So does a certain dense, skunky smell I've smelled before. Both are definitely coming from the end unit. I stop at the door and knock. Nothing. Just stink and beeping. Bun? I call Bunny? A few rooms back, I think I see a curtain twitch. I ignore it and try the door. It's unlocked. I push it open. Instantly, the beeping gets louder. Weed stink gushes out on a wave of warm air. Lights are glowing over a small jungle of pot plants on one side of the room. Some kind of foil blanket hangs behind the curtains, duct taped to the wall, and the carpet is stained. Apart from the plants, the room is empty, except for a ratty couch and a shiny pole that runs from floor to ceiling in the middle of the room. One end of a set of handcuffs is clamped around the bottom of the pole. I'm not even going to think about that. The phone beeps are coming from a kitchenette behind the couch. Bunny! I try again. I know nobody's home. Get the phone and get out, I think. I tiptoe fast to the kitchenette. Partway there, I wonder why I'm tiptoeing, but I do it anyway. And there's Bun's phone, beeping away on the floor by the counter. I'm just bending for it when I hear a rustling in the leaves behind me and a sound that's a cross between a creaking door and a bullfrog on steroids. I look over my shoulder. Looking back at me is an alligator.
Welcome back to the Jan Spragge Show. Just before the break, we were chatting with the authors of the 7-series sequel, Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock. And the second series, if I might call it series, how does it differ from the first?
It has a different jumping off point. Again, when we were trying to think of a hook that would hang the series, we wanted to keep it as open-ended, as specific at the beginning, and as open-ended at the end as we could. So we came up with a different hook. What was Grandpa up to in the 50s and 60s? And we wanted to leave a mystery. Ted, what was our mystery?
Well, in the first series, right, Grandpa dies and leaves sort of a bucket list for his grandsons to accomplish for him. And we could make up what those tasks would be, what adventures they would have, and so on. So as the second series opens, it's the Christmas following the summertime when most of these adventures took place.
6 months later.
6 months later. And in this case, what happens is the grandsons, a number of the grandsons discover evidence that indicates that the grandfather could possibly have been, at the very least, a spy, if not, perhaps, if not also a double agent or even a traitor. And of course, this strikes right to the heart of who Grandpa was. What was his character like? Was the man that they knew the actual person? Mm-hmm. Where can you go with that?
Mm-hmm.
And when you do go with this, I understand you go to uncanny lengths to do research.
Vast amounts of research. Oh my God, I spent minutes on the internet. Minutes, I tell you.
That's Richard's style.
Shane, you might be able to speak to this point a little bit.
I did a little bit of research, but sometimes maybe I do. Sometimes I do a little bit too much. I mean, my character is a kind of a James Bond character, so that was wonderful research. I got to watch the James Bond movies again, watch Skyfall, all sorts of times, and read some of the Ian Fleming things. And I think some of us certainly did some research about about spies and about the 50s and 60s. I read a lot about the Cuban Missile Crisis and about Ian Fleming, who had just a really interesting life on his own beyond these characters that he created.
Yeah, I reread a bunch of Len Deighton, the Ipcress File and $1 Billion Brain and stuff like that. Partly because my character wears big clunky glasses, just like the Michael Caine character
Harry
in those
Palmer.
movies. Harry Palmer. And in fact, one of the epigraphs in my book is a quote from Len Deighton. But otherwise, part of what's cool about this is you get to imagine whatever you want. So Richard and I ended up making up an entire non-existent country.
Yeah.
Replete with its own terrorists and
And national anthem.
and national anthem. So,
Can we sing that now, guys?
We could, yeah. So that's even more fun than research.
Yes. Invention is always more fun than research.
Who can tell you you're wrong?
And Ted and Richard, you did collaborate more, but there was collaboration maybe right across the board for the most part, as you were saying earlier, Norah. But what was that like, taking the time to collaborate and interweaving your stories?
Well, the actual writing is certainly alone. I was not peering over Ted's shoulder as he wrote, and he certainly wasn't peering over mine. But we did sit down with a very large bottle of
Milk.
to sit down and try to work out a plot that would work for both of us. And Ted came up with this hilarious brand new country with its own terrorists. And I just wanted to make my character get in trouble, and he was going to get kidnapped. And so Ted said, why don't the terrorists kidnap your character? And there's another plot that's going to work itself into both plots. And my character, who spends a whole lot of his time not knowing what's going on, is quite happy I'm quite happy to have him not know what's going on in this character, in this story. And he has to escape from the terrorists and maybe find his way home. So mine's a very easy journey story that way. And all sorts of crazy things happen to him along the way. And Ted's story was much more convoluted and having to do with the political machinations of this invented country. And he was much more spy-centered, no?
Sure, yeah. That's quite true. I mean, my guy's goal is to try and find Richard's character who has gone missing and has been kidnapped. So we're telling the two sides of the story. And the fun part was, as we worked towards the end, we had agreed that the stories would overlap in two places where the characters would talk, but each time they'd have to misperceive what the other was saying via cell phone or texts or whatever. And then how do we get to the end and have the endings be satisfying without giving away
Right.
what the
the
other
other book,
ending
right,
would
yes.
be? And that was fun to work out. But I quite enjoyed that. I think partly because writing is so solitary. I quite like the idea of collaboration and plotting things out and saying, well, if you have that happen, you know what, this would, and suddenly you've got something that's bigger than the parts.
Was it strange going back and then writing on your own for, say, another book after the first series?
It was very nice. In some ways, that's true. It's interesting how when you write as a group like this, there are things about it that are restricting. But I think it's good for your discipline as well. Like I was saying before, how it's almost like a writing exercise. There's certain things you must do. There's certain areas you must go. Like in this new book, for example, my character, Eric asked me actually if my character would send some information to Norah's character. And Norah's character was in North America. So I had to find a place in the book where my character got this information off to Nora's character, and it couldn't seem stilted. It had to seem like part of the story. So some of those things, while they restrict you a little bit, they're interesting to try to do.
Yeah, the idea of avoiding the info dump.
Right.
That's
Yes,
so
yes.
Yes.
you're reading a story and your character pauses in the middle of the story to say, oh, by the way, reader, I want to tell you some things. You may not know that 25 years ago this is what was happening. That you have to avoid.
It's exposition. That's
Yeah.
what they call it. It's exposition. And I think as writers, when we watch movies and so on, we always hate those moments in the films where, okay, here it comes. Here's the information dump. Here's the exposition. And yeah, I think it's a real challenge when you have the 7 books together like that.
I just have my guy go on Wikipedia. I needed an info dump. I'll tell you what I find a little disconcerting is not so much the collaboration, but having written 2 of these, and the book I wrote in between them sort of had a kind of a big plot also, is sort of going back to writing what is essentially a smaller story or a somewhat more natural
A piece of the story, a facet of the story.
The
Yeah.
7 series is a little more like that.
Whereas
Yeah.
this is just when in doubt, it's the old Raymond Chandler thing. When in doubt, have a man with a gun come through the door.
Right.
It's hard to do that in most books about, I don't know, high school or something. Well, not maybe, but you know what I mean? I found it hard as I started to work on another book and think, wow, is this big enough? Should I always now be thinking about a herd of elephants rampaging instead of, a smaller story?
Another meteor is going to attack the world? Oh my God! Yeah,
I agree.
Did I tell you about that?
I agree. I found writing the books in the 7 series was very different for me. I usually do not write these kinds of stories. I mean, I was writing The Boy Sherlock Holmes. My stories are often set in history. They tend to be quite a bit darker. The thing I'm writing right now, and I was working on it while I was writing W, is a horror story. It's a horror story set in the 1890s in Scotland and in London and so on. And so it's a very, very different kind of story. But writing that kind of story, that sort of horror story, it's easier to write sort of alone. Whereas this story, these kinds of stories that are present tense and maybe a little bit funnier, more adventure and so on, I think it's a little easier to work with others on that kind of story. Seemed to be anyway.
Mm-hmm. Today we have the pleasure of chatting with authors from the 7 series sequel. After the break, we'll chat more with Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock about the series. I'm Jan Spragge. You're listening to Northumberland 89.7. Please stay tuned.
My story is called W, and on the surface it's kind of a James Bond adventure. The character goes to Bermuda and Jamaica and so on, and it's that kind of adventure. But underneath, I'm trying to tell a story a little bit about a kid who's growing up, and he's understanding that there's sort of a duality to life, that there's two sides to most stories and lots of stories. So the word W is very important in the story. And one of the things that he has kind of different thoughts about is guns. And, a lot of boys are really interested in guns and violence and so on. So I wanted to sort of address that issue in here. So this is from the very beginning of the novel. James Bond's weapon of choice is a Walther PPK pistol. You see it in his movies, a cold, hard piece of steel held in the grip of the most daring secret agent of all time. Sometimes it looks deceptively small, like an extension of his hand, while other times it's long and deadly, with a silencer attached to muffle the sound as another villain eats lead. But now I was seeing it somewhere else, somewhere it didn't belong. It lay on a table in front of me at our family's cottage in northern Ontario, looking as innocent as a gun could. A gun used by a man with a license to kill. That man, of course, was 007, not my grandfather, David McLean, though within days I would begin to wonder if that description fit him too. The gun mesmerized me, and when the others weren't looking, I took it. I even convinced myself that I hadn't really taken the gun from anyone, and certainly not to be used as a weapon. I reasoned, so far as I reasoned at all, that it didn't belong to anyone anymore, and that I had no intention of using it, which is why it shocked me so much when I later employed it with such precision. I also told myself that I had every intention of giving it back, which I did, and that none of my cousins seemed to want it anyway. Something consumed me when I saw it. Something bad.
Welcome back to the Jan Spragge Show. Just before the break, we were chatting with the authors of the 7 series sequel, Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock. Well, I have to say, guys, it must be quite an event when all 7 of you are in the same room, which I know happens from time to time. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Well, it's a bit of a gong show. It's a lot of fun. One of the things that, because we've all been writing for kids for a long time, we understand that you don't want to get up and read your book in a monotone, that if you're going to speak to a large audience...
It's way better if somebody jumps in front of you and
Yes,
starts taking over for you. So, in fact, we end up stealing each other's thunder every few minutes in the course of the evening, and we mostly get a kick out of being on stage together and bugging each other and stealing the mic from each other, and anytime you guys want to jump in, help
Well,
yourself.
this typically comes after a day in which we have all been out at schools doing presentations. So last, when the heck was that? We did Simcoe area.
Simcoe
Yes,
County.
last
Simcoe
fall.
County. We did 56 schools in, 4 days?
Yeah.
And then,
And
but among the
everybody
7 of
survived.
us-
There were no fatalities.
But
So we
then
were
every
punchy.
evening, so we would go to the schools, and then every evening, the 7 of us would get together in a school auditorium somewhere. That was a free event, right? People could just come.
That's right.
And then we would do
Our dog and pony show.
Yes, our dog and pony show. And that was always really well attended. It was a lot of fun. I
That's-
think the audience had a great time.
That's one of the really cool things about it. We actually go and speak places, and it's full. I mean, it is packed. People can't get in. So it's pretty cool to have that many people gathering for a literary event.
Yeah, and the thing is, when we do a school, we also do floors and windows. So it's a
bargain.
It's a bargain.
All
Right?
buffed
Twice
all
the
the
price.
time. That's right.
Yeah, and we're not talking about the presenters.
And so we set it up just like a show when we speak, and everybody. And we were talking earlier on about how we all write differently. We all present differently too. And some of us maybe a little more serious, some of us are funny or whatever. And so we always set it up when we do the show so that it follows in a way that we have maybe a funny presentation by a more serious one, a more dramatic one.
And it culminates with John, who does his thing via interpretive
John Wilson.
dance.
That's classic.
His
have
accent
yet
being
to see
difficult
that.
to understand.
John has
Resort to-
a Scottish
resort to
accent. You
dance.
have to eat with a spoon. So
If
in
you
fact,
get a chance to see John Wilson dance, you've got to come.
It's kind of like that guy in The Big Lebowski. No, the guy who
What?
did the interpretive dance.
nice.
You know that.
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
And to get the feedback from your readers
Help
must
us,
be
Jan.
extraordinary. Well, I don't think that's something that readers for adult fiction get the same way.
I have done some adult work, and when I'm talking to an adult audience, I'm aware of how darn polite they are. They're sitting there, they're paying attention, they're nodding, and they're looking serious. I want to say to them, hey, essentially, I'm a kid's author. Scream, jump, have fun. So it's just as a hoot, as a kid's author, you get to talk to the kids at the school during the day, and then you see them again that night, and everybody's just having a good time. There's a lot of yelling. There's a lot of laughter. There's a lot of standing on chairs, and this is something you just don't
We yell at you. is
Yeah,
what
well,
happens.
everybody yells at me, so you just don't get that as an adult author. I think it's one of the coolest things about being a kid's author.
Well, most of the time, in fact, I think if you're an adult author, you rarely meet your audience unless you're at a festival or you're invited to a specific reading at, say, a public library or a series or something like that. Otherwise, more often than not, you're sort of the butt of that old joke where you meet somebody who says, "Oh, I read that book," and you say, "You're the one who bought it."
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, did you give it to your mom?
But
That would make two of
it
you.
is interesting the difference between kids and adults as readers and fans and so on, because I write a lot for adults as well, and a lot of times the feedback you get from an adult is, well, that was an interesting book or something like that. A kid will come up to you and say, Mr. Peacock, that was the greatest book I ever read. Or
more
they'll say,
just as common.
that sucked. That sucked.
They're pretty honest.
Yeah.
Pretty honest.
Why did you do that? I've had that a number of times. Why did you make it so the guy doesn't know how to spell? And I say, well, I don't know how to
That's
spell.
horrible, Mr. Scrimger.
We may be raising a new generation of kids that when they're adults will be less inhibited
Let's hope.
in their approach to authors because they treat us like we're just friends in their school.
Now
or-
that said,
or-
we're all old enough to remember a time before authors visited schools. When I
Before
was
there
grow-
were authors in Canada who wrote for children.
When I was a kid, I didn't see a single author in any school that I ever until ever. I didn't meet an author until I was in my 20s. But all the kids now say, "Oh, so you're the author this year, or you're the author this week, or I just had Eric Walters."
Oh, Eric
That's it.
again.
I just had Eric Walters in my school last week,
Yeah.
or Ted, or whoever it would be. And I think this generation of Canadian kids knows that writers are just regular guys who show up and drink a cup of coffee and put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else.
Preferably.
And according to the teacher librarians,
As opposed
because
to-
often we are invited by or interact with the teacher librarians if there are any at a particular school, and they will say that the kids do get interested in reading after that. They want to read the books by various authors and so
That
on.
they've
So
met, yeah.
having met somebody does seem to have a little bit of a drive towards the kids wanting to
Connect.
read.
Makes
yeah.
it seem real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the boys too, right? I mean,
Yeah. No,
the-
absolutely.
The connection is totally real. This is what he looks like, or this is what she looks
And you
like.
meet someone as cool as Richard or Shane or Ted,
Well,
and
not
they're
Ted,
so
not Ted,
cool,
not
and they're
Ted.
writers. Then of course you want to read their books. And,
But
who knows?
it's interesting as guys, if I can speak maybe for this side of the room here. It is interesting when we
Nora's
go
on the other side.
when we go yes when we go into a school and there are boys there and you can see when you come in to speak that the boys are looking at you like, oh man, do I have to sit through this? And then you try to direct what you say to them, and you can see them light up. You maybe ask them about the hockey game last night or something before it starts, and they think you're a real person and you're not some stuffy guy in corduroy pants with a pipe sitting in a corner writing these books. Although Richard's a bit like
corduroys a lot.
Yeah, maybe I'm describing Richard.
I was going to say my corduroys are blushing right now.
Well,
that's
It's not your corduroys.
I mean, at the end of the day, the kids not only come away motivated to read, and that's why I've encouraged them to read my book 7 times, but also they simply realize, a person actually did this.
Yeah.
I could do that.
Yes.
It's not some mysterious thing that happens somewhere.
Yes,
where
the
books are
Amazon
created.
ferry just sort of deposits a bunch of books every week.
That sort of almost normal-looking person at the front of the room.
With the corduroys and the pipe.
And I think Canadians
Norah.
also. Canadians have a bad habit of thinking that big things happen other places too. I mean, I think it's almost like a characteristic of Canadians, and it goes down to the kids too. And when you can, we speak in Cobourg and Port Hope and Peterborough and places like that. And when you come into the school and you say, well, I just live north of Cobourg or something like that, then it really connects for the kids.
But interestingly, these books are all set all over the world, and
They are.
very few of them are set in Canada, as I understand. Mine's set in Detroit.
Well,
Where's yours?
Toronto.
Oh,
actually.
Toronto!
Yeah. My guy can't go anywhere. He's
Long story, huh?
It's a long story. You'd have to read the book to understand. But yeah, I kept mine set entirely in Toronto.
My guy does not know where he is.
Mine is in Bermuda and Jamaica.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Now we're talking.
So they're and we've
one
got
is
England
in-
for Eric, and
Right.
Spain for John,
For John.
and
Where's
Sigmund is in the
Sigmund?
southern United States.
Yeah, the Deep South. Yeah.
Yeah, dealing with the Vietnam War, right?
One of the things we actually talked about before we wrote the very first series was that it was important that the characters did go out around the world, and that it wasn't this sort of insular little Canadian series. This
nothing
is something
ever
that
happens
has
here.
never been. This is a kind of series that's never been done before. We wanted to create a Canadian series that was huge everywhere.
Yeah. And so in the first book, I sent my guy. Just by contrast with the second, I sent my guy to Buffalo.
All the way to Buffalo.
Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
Mine went to Iceland,
Okay, talk me. Go ahead.
like Kilimanjaro.
No, never mind.
Eric's book, his character actually climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and I believe that Eric has slides of himself writing the book while he is climbing Mount
He does.
Kilimanjaro, because he really researched that one.
Well, in my own defense, when I called Eric back, and at first I said, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to do the series. I phoned him back and I said, I'm thinking of Ethiopia, because I had visited there, and Eric said, well, you can't do that. My guy's climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. I've got Africa. So my default position was, okay, Buffalo.
Eric owns Africa.
A natural default, Ted.
Yes,
Natural.
natural.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jen. I'm glad you
Yeah.
understand that. Yeah, good.
And so what about the rest of this troupe, Eric, John, and Sigmund? Can you tell me a little bit about their work and their style and how that comes
we
into
don't
this?
want to really talk about them.
They'll be out of prison.
Yes. Do we have? I think the restraining order. Yes.
Eric Walters is an amazing writer and an even more amazing person. I mean, he does all kinds of work for charity. He's built an orphanage in Kenya. He's a wonderful guy, and in some ways it's reflected in this series. I mean, he obviously he wants to write a book that sells and he makes a living at it and so on. But he also wanted to create a series that would help boys to read and kids to read. And he wanted to involve a lot of really good writers. And he wrote 2 wonderful books, both in the original series and in the sequel. His first one is called Between Heaven and Earth,
Yes.
where, as we mentioned, his character climbs Mount Kilimanjaro. And the second one is called Sleeper. And a lot of it takes place in London, and it deals with the Cambridge Five, which is Kim Philby and all of these very famous MI6 agents who became traitors. Kim Philby ended up living in the Soviet Union. And
Sigmund's character is, when we meet him in the first book, he's a kid who's been living on the street because of his family situation, and he ends up going up north to carry out Grandpa's last wish for him. And Sigmund himself is very interested in music, so his character Webb is always has his guitar with him, and he's really into music too. So that's a big feature of a lot of what Sigmund does in his books in the series.
John's better known as a nonfiction writer, a historian, than as he's as well known for that as for his novel writing. So his first book was set during the Spanish Civil War in the 30s. And he has a lot of fun giving us a strong historical perspective. He gives Grandpa as a kid. In fact, the historical Grandpa in that first book is as powerful a character as anything he draws. His new book is called
Broken Arrow.
It's called Broken Arrow, and he likes to go back to Spain, and that involves a downed aircraft in the Iberian Peninsula at the time of the Cold War.
Today we have the pleasure of chatting with authors from the 7 series sequel. After the break, we'll chat more with Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock about the series. I'm Jan Spragge. You're listening to Northumberland 89.7. Please stay tuned.
Okay, so my character, his name is Rennie. He has just arrived in Detroit and is at an address where he thinks he might get a clue, but what he's actually found is an old man lying on the floor in the house. And so in order to help the old man, he has broken into the house. And he has helped the old man. Then, instead of thanking me, he says, "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my house? I saw you lying on the floor in here. I thought..." The old man looks at the window. He's scowling when he turns back to me. "How?" he demands. "How did you see me lying on the floor?" I'm thinking of the best way to answer when I hear footsteps behind me and the distinctive sound of someone racking a shotgun. A deep voice barks, "Hands up or I'll shoot." He sounds like he means business. I swallow hard and remember something I overheard on the plane. A man in a business suit was telling his seatmate that in Detroit a person has the right to shoot an intruder in his house. He also said that Detroit accounts for 43% of all concealed weapons permits in Michigan, which means you don't want to get on the wrong side of anyone when you're there because you never know who's packing. He swore there were church ministers in Detroit who carry guns while they're preaching. I glance at the door frame. It's shattered thanks to me and my docs. The lock is likely broken. No one invited me in, yet here I am. And that, I believe, fits the definition of intruder in any and every jurisdiction you'd care to mention. My life doesn't exactly flash before my eyes, but certain parts of it do. Specifically, the part a couple of days ago when I stopped minding my own business, which I believe is the best way for anyone to spend his life, and started minding someone else's.
Welcome back to the Jan Spragge Show. Just before the break, we were chatting with the authors of the 7 series sequel, Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock.
I think one of the things we'd love to see is for kids to read all 14 books, and not just because we want the kids to read our books, we want kids to read books. You know, I just think it's really important, and in the world nowadays where some kids are turning away from books, it's wonderful to be part of a series that's popular and kids are reading.
If the kids can get a sense from reading 7 or 14 or as many of these books as they want to read, if they can get a small sense, a taste of how much fun we had writing it, that's cool. The idea that reading is actually, it's not a chore, it's not something the teacher makes you do, it's not something your mom stands over you while you do. If reading can actually be kind of fun, that would be the message we'd get across.
It's not a punishment. When my girls basically live in a library. We have so many books in our house. But I would say, why don't you go read a book? And it was a punishment. Like where they would take it as, oh, I don't want to do that.
For 15 minutes, I'm locked in my room with a...
But that's the real important thing that we want people to read. We want kids to read because it's a fun thing to do. And also, it's an interesting thing to do. I don't want to say that these books are like history books, but you learn a lot of, interesting things about people, psychology, the world, history.
You learn how people behave, which is kind of what life's all about anyway.
And if you come and see us present, you will understand how there is nothing like reading.
I mean, all stories are mysteries. I mean, these are very much, in their way, overt mysteries. But all stories are mysteries in the sense that you're wondering, mostly they're mysteries about people.
What's going to happen next? How
do people behave? Why do they behave? Why is always the big question. And, these books are a really interesting and accessible way into that. But, I think, I was talking with a teacher the other day, and I probably sort of put my foot in it. Schools do a fantastic job of teaching kids to read. It's really difficult sometimes in their environment to motivate kids to read. And, the day that there's, I don't know, where there's downtime out of school just before Christmas holidays or whatever, when they, instead of putting on a movie, when they just say to kids, you know what, you can go to the library, and kids make a beeline for the door, that's the day, then we can all retire. Because then the job is done.
Except that we have to write more books for them to read.
No, they can read mine.
7 times.
You have problems with that.
77 times 7. Somebody said that.
It's a biblical thing.
That's a good. I like that.
And the
Meanwhile,
next
we'll be
series?
writing round 3.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is there a round 3 in the works?
Oh.
But there are some
Talking
vague,
about
there are vague
that's-
premonitions of possibilities for round 3. We've been tossing some ideas around. They are still very much in the underdone stage. They are not
A
ready to
couple
come
of people
out of the
came
oven.
up with a harebrained idea, so I'm not going to say who it
Who
was.
was that?
Who would they be?
Hair and brained, exactly. Think of that. Yes.
Wasn't John.
A meeting of two very strange minds. That's what it was.
Today we have the pleasure of chatting with authors from the 7 series sequel. After the break, we'll chat more with Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock about the series. I'm Jan Spragge. You're listening to Northumberland 89.7. Please stay tuned.
The hero of my books is named Bunny. He's a developmentally challenged 15-year-old. He's getting to be 16 in this book, and he writes as he sees. So if you open my books, you might say, "Wow, Richard really does not know how to spell." In fact, I'm trying to give you a sense of how Bunny sees the world, and it's your way in. If you're having trouble reading the story, what I suggest you do is hear it in your mind, and as you hear the words that Bunny is hearing, you'll find that it makes sense. So that this story that I'm going to read now, this section I'm going to read now, though it looks odd on the page, as you'll hear, it sounds perfectly normal. This is the way Bunny is hearing the story. This is from fairly early on in my book, The Wolf and Me. As Ted alluded, Bunny and Spencer, his brother, were skating at City Hall in Toronto, and what happens is that Bunny has got kidnapped by some bad guys. The opening line of Spencer's book is "Bunny's gone," and the opening line of my story is "I'm in trouble." So further on, he has been kidnapped with his skates on, and in fact, he has to escape from his kidnappers and find his way home. So it's kind of a skating home story. Okay, the bit I'll read happens fairly early on after he's broken away from the kidnapper's place. He does not know where this is. Okay. Things get worse. My left skate is undone, and when I bend over to tie it again, the lace breaks. Bang! Or more like thwap. I end up lying in the road holding a piece of lace. This is not a big bad thing, like being kidnapped a long way from home, which is also true for me. But it seems really, really bad. I was not upset before, but I am now. I start crying almost over a skate lace. Funny, eh? And then I hear Santa. Jingle, 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 jingle. Damn it, Rudolph! Jingle, jingle. Stop, Rudolph! Stop! Damn, stop! That's what I hear. It's not really him, but Santa is what I think about when I hear the jingling and the name. And this is a good place to see Santa. A real old-fashioned winter picture with snow and ice and some forest and a lot of quiet. A horse is pulling a sled towards me. Perfect for the scene. It has those big runner things that bend up in the front. Bells hang on the reins. The driver pulls on them, and the sled finally stops. Want some help? He calls. I am trying to figure him out. He's fat, and he has a beard, and he drives a sled with jingle bells. But he has a horse instead of a reindeer, and his sled doesn't fly, and his beard and coat are brown. He's like Santa's poor little brother, Sid Claus. I think about that for a second. Life at home with a big brother who brings home A+ report cards and gives presents to all the poor kids. His parents and teachers go on about how wonderful he is. That Nicholas, he's a saint, they say. And meanwhile, poor Sid, the brother, is not doing so well. Everybody is shaking their heads and saying, Sid won't amount to anything. A saint? Don't make me laugh. These thoughts are getting close to my home life. Spencer's teachers really like him, and mine don't think much of me. The only A I ever got was at Creekside this year because Mr. Wing liked a story I wrote. When I get back, I will write up this hostage and skating story. I wonder how it will end.
Welcome back to the Jan Spragge Show. Just before the break, we were chatting with the authors of the 7-series sequel, Ted Staunton, Richard Scrimger, Norah McClintock, and Shane Peacock. I understand that you have an event coming up in Port Hope, Ted.
We do. On October 21st, all 7 authors are going to be at schools in Northumberland County all day long, both morning and afternoon sessions. And in the evening...
For how much money, Ted?
Probably not enough. In your case, I donated your services. And in the evening, all 7 authors will be at the Port Hope Public Library at 7 p.m. for a free group presentation for anyone who wants to attend. Kids, families, grown-ups,
Dogs, cats.
well, they have an admissions thing,
Right,
but no,
okay.
it will be. It'll be a really fun evening, and there will be books there available for sale, and of course, there's the books in the library to sign out. Get a library card. Do the whole 9 yards. We want to see you there.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we're unfortunately running out of time. Joining us in the studio today were 4 of the 7 authors from the 7 series from Orca Book Publishers. You can find out more about the 7 series by visiting the7sequels.com. There you will find a host of fascinating and delightful items to explore, including a book trailer, maps to follow the grandson's adventures, and links to the authors' websites. The series is available now at your favorite bookseller and the library. Stay up to date with the latest about the show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Jan Spragge Show, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the series, so be sure to message me or contact me here through the station. Thank you for listening today. I'm Jan Spragge, and I look forward to hanging out with you next time here on Northumberland 89.7. Be well.
Explode out of it. That's what happened to Mark's Brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We'll just fall out together.
Scene ends.
Maybe you can take one chair. Yeah, that'd be great.
Now take the other chair. Not that chair.
Whichever stick you want. I don't know which. I think Tweety Bird's pretty well full. Isn't he?
the chairs out?
No, do we have time to do you have 1 second? I'll just take a photograph of them and say goodbye, or do you have time?